Ysgard's a plane on an epic scale, with soaring mountains, deep fjords, and dark caverns that hide the secret forges of the dwarves. A biting wind always blows at a hero's back, and many of Ysgard's petitioners are heroes who've been slain in battle 1,000 times over. In a place where petitioners die each day and then get up for a hearty breakfast, anything is possible. In Ysgard, every day is a perfect day to die, just how it was yesterday and the day before. This is the heaven of the warriors. Only the most badass can get in, only the greatest heroes that the multiverse has ever seen are ever summoned to Valhalla to become part of the army known as the Einherjar, the army of Odin, who is destined to fight outside of Asgard in Ragnarok. Join me and let's talk about one of the coolest planar heavens of Dungeons and Dragons. Also, this is the third video on this series. You should watch these videos first if you're interested in the topic. On the first video we covered Ragnarok and what are the events that will trigger it and what exactly will happen during it. On the second video we covered Dendar, the Night Serpent, who is also known as Nidhogg, the serpent worm who is destined to devour Yggdrasil and perhaps even destroy the multiverse. Today we're here to talk about the actual plane of Ysgard itself and what are the things that you can find in here. We will talk about the Valkyries, the different realms of Ysgard and more, but first... This video is brought to you by Dice Dreams, a mobile multiplayer dice game where you build your boards, obtain gold, and sabotage your friends by destroying their boards and stealing their gold. The game itself is very simple. It's meant to be a very chill game, so it's basically about rolling dice and using your rewards to progress through the game. The dice all have different options in them, and if you roll 3 of the same option, then you get a special reward. There are attack rewards that let you blow up the bases of other people, which of course rewards you as well. You can get shields, which prevent you from getting your own base blown up. You can get the steal reward, which allows you to straight up just take money from someone else, and many more, like free extra rolls, jackpot rewards, and then the random question mark, which can be anything. The goal is of course to collect as much gold as possible in order to fill up your board, and when you do so, you get to move on to the next tier where many surprises lay. The game is of course littered with a ton of minigames, many of which are designed to beat you against others, where you can do PvP and wager rewards to see who wins it. The theme is board games after all, so there are many different ways to play against others or against the AI. This of course includes special events and constant new features added every single week. My favorite part is just how relaxed it is. You can really lose yourself in it. Sometimes so much so that you may even forget to feed your pets. My god, yeah Bam, I'll get to it, okay? Just give me some more time. To start playing Dice Dreams today, just click the link below. And now for the first time ever, you can see how many people like you have downloaded Dice Dreams in real time. Every time someone downloads Dice Dreams, the widget in the description box will update in real time. So download Dice Dreams today and let's get that number as high as possible. As you can imagine, it helps the channel quite a bit, so any help is extremely appreciated. If you enjoy the channel, this is a great way to support me and the content that I do. Thank you guys so much for all the support. Now, on to the video. As a planar realm, Ysgard is set on the very far end of the right hemisphere. This of course is the chaotic side. Now, if you were wondering how does a chaotic realm look like, well, wonder no longer. As divine lands go closer to pure chaos, they become less structured, to the point of breaking down traditionally established rules for what would be considered normal. And Ysgard is no exception. The lands of Ysgard are actually fragmented into an uncountable number of what you would call earthbergs, or land islands. They are these large pieces of earth of varying sizes that float together like they're being carried on by a river. Now, it is not quite as chaotic as it is in Limbo, where pieces of land float in all directions and change form all the time, but instead, the actual land masses in here are fairly stable. And the floating is always done in a fairly straightforward line, like a river. These pieces of land often collide with one another, forming dangerous earthquakes, sometimes pushing onto each other to the point where they grind on each other for centuries, creating mountains as the land pushes themselves together from both sides. And sometimes these big earthquakes are strong enough to shatter bigger land masses into smaller floating islands, or at least strong enough to create massive fissures on the land which become a permanent fixture there on the island. Now, this feature of Ysgard is prevalent on all three of the main layers of the plane. The first layer is Ysgard, from which the whole plane is of course named after, since this is by far the most important layer, though to avoid confusion sometimes this layer is also called Gladsheim, which happens to be also the name of the main hall of Odin. But then there is Muspelheim, the second layer, and lastly we have Nidavellir, the third layer. All these layers consist of floating pieces of land, but what separates these three from each other is how those pieces of land look. See, these floating islands all have earth on one side of them, but then fire on the opposite side. They also all have normal gravity, so in the whole plane there will always be an up and there will always be a down, and that never changes. Now, if the Earth Islands have earth at the top and fire at the bottom, then that means that you are in Ysgard. If the islands are flipped so that the fire is at the top and the earth is at the bottom, then that means that you are in Muspelheim. If the islands are clustered together to the point where they are basically just always constantly colliding or are constantly on top of each other, effectively permanently sandwiched together, then you know that you are in Nidavellir. So, because of how these floating islands are designed, most petitioners and gods reside within the Ysgard layer, since these lands are the most habitable, as you would imagine. Now, you do have to deal with collisions, but they are fairly rare. But yeah, this is where most of the normal barbarians would live. Muspelheim would be where the fire giants live, since the upper set of the Earth Islands are all fire, of course. And then in Nidavellir, none can realistically live on the outside because of the constant direct collisions that happen all the time, but also because those lands grind on top of each other all the time. So basically, trying to live outside would have you be hit by the fiery underside of another Earth Island from above. The sky of Nidavellir is basically just like a constant sky of fire, and so in this place everyone lives underground. This would actually be where many of the dwarves and dark elves live. Now, let's of course cover the Ysgard layer first, since it is the most important. So by far the most well-known and the most important realm within the Ysgard layer is of course Asgard, who is the realm of the Aesir Norse gods. See, the Norse gods are divided in two. You got the Aesir, who are the combat war gods like Odin, Thor, Heimdall, Tyr, and the rest. And then you got the Vanir, who are the agriculture, reproduction, and peace-related gods like Frey and Freya. And these guys fought an enormous war for control over Ysgard a long time ago, but of course, eventually they settled for peace and now are basically entwined together like one big loving family, though they still do live in separate realms. Asgard, of course, is the realm of the Aesir gods, and then Vanaheim would be the realm of the Vanir gods. Now, it is important to mention that most people probably live outside of these great realms. And that has a lot to do with that which drives a person into ending here as a heaven in the first place. You don't just come here or end here if you're looking to settle down into a nice home. You come here because you love adventure. You love the life of a barbarian. You want to explore huge mountains, you want to kill badass monsters, you fight against giants, you set up a camp in the wilderness and drink merrily with your friends and then set out again in the morning to sail towards the unknown in your longship. I mean, that is the mindset of the warriors that make Ysgard their home. And so no one's really out there just like making villages and farming. That doesn't happen very often in here. And to compound on that would be, of course, the magic of the realm itself, that which makes this place unique. See, and this is really cool. So if you come here as a petitioner, that being like, if you die on the prime material world and you either venerated a Norse god or vibed very well with the philosophies of Ysgard, then you're sent here as a spirit to live out your heaven. These are what you would call petitioners. Now, Ysgard's petitioners are resurrected the next morning every single time they are killed. It don't matter how or why, you will be revived the next morning. This is why in Ysgard everyone is a badass. Everyone is strong and fearless because I mean, there's literally nothing to fear. The philosophy of might makes right is strong as hell in here. You fight for what you want, and if you cannot defend a right or an object, then you don't deserve that right or object. That is the law of the land, and explorers who come here thinking that this will be like any other plane always come in severely disappointed. Now, be mindful that I have specified petitioners in here. Petitioners revive automatically the next morning when slain. People who visit Ysgard are not petitioners. That, of course, would include player characters who come here to adventure as part of a campaign. A player character has to be very careful about visiting this plane because petitioners, yeah, they do love fighting, and they are not afraid to die. They will challenge you, and they will try to kill you, sometimes maybe even just for fun, because that is what people do here. If you die, however, it is over for you unless, and this is where things get really cool, unless you're a badass. At which point, well, things change. See, this is the next twist to Ysgard. A mortal warrior who dies heroically, who either venerates the Norse gods or perishes within Asgard, is allowed another chance at life. And I mean anybody, even those that are not petitioners. And this is where we talk about the Valkyries. The Valkyries are demigod servants to the Norse gods. There is a total of 27 of them, and they all take on the form of heavily armored, blonde human females with braids. And they fly using extremely powerful Pegasus. I mean, like, really powerful Pegasus. Like, we're talking about these horses being challenge rating 12 creatures. They are so strong. Now, these women have the ability to hear the sounds of combat and smell the scent of blood from worlds away. It is effectively the same power that gods normally use to track down their followers, so it really only works for followers of the Norse gods. But if you do follow Odin and you die on epic combat, the Valkyrie can hear you and smell your blood. Now, if you died an epic death as a badass warrior, then the Valkyrie will fly down to you and grant you a second chance at life, typically by, of course, taking you to either Valhalla or Sesrumnir. See, the idea here is that half of those slain in battle would go to Odin and his hall in Asgard, while the other half would go to Freya and her hall in Vanaheim. The 3rd edition book, Deities and Demigods, does confuse things a bit because it says, quote, half those slain in battle, and all women so slain, come to Freya's hall, Sesrumnir, end quote. I'm actually, frankly, very confused as to what exactly is the all women so slain portion means. So, in real Norse mythology, in the real world, if I'm not mistaken, women who die a noble death were automatically sent to Sesrumnir, regardless of whether they died in battle or not. So, for example, if you were a woman and your husband went to war and died, the widow could starve herself to death in order to be sent to Sesrumnir as well, without having to actually fight. Now, I am reluctant to use real-life mythos stuff on a D&D passage because, many things are different in D&D than they are in real life. But yeah, I'm not sure if that's what this sentence here means, or if it is implying that all women who die in battle go to Sesrumnir rather than go to Valhalla, whereas the man would go to Valhalla. Planescape was actually very clear that there are plenty of warrior women in Valhalla, so I'm actually not sure it is that. But yeah, maybe you guys can help me out on this one, I'm not so sure. Moving on though, so the lore is also quite a bit confusing as to what exactly happens when you're picked up by a Valkyrie. So you can venerate the Norse gods, die, become a petitioner, and just naturally make it to Ysgard, no problem. But if you die in a badass way, a Valkyrie can notice you being really badass and then specifically pick you and then take you to either Sesrumnir or Valhalla. And the way it is described, there is no functional difference between Sesrumnir or Valhalla, just the personalities that rule it. So Valhalla would be your more typically brawly, rowdy place where the love of battle is what drives everyone, while Sesrumnir is more calm and less inclined to violence. In Asgard, warriors seek glory in wild melees and exuberant shows of strength, whereas in Vanaheim, warriors perform constructed contests of skill. They do regulated duels and, they do a lot of rituals of fertility, let's call it that. If you're wondering, Freya, which rules Sesrumnir, is, quote, the deity of erotic and sensual love, end quote. So those warriors who go to Sesrumnir sometimes do a different kind of sword fighting, but anyways, a warrior who is handpicked by a Valkyrie and sent to either of these halls turns into what we call an Einherjar, which translates into Army of One. Now, what these Einherjar really are is what is a bit confusing because they are different from a petitioner, but it is hard to tell exactly how fundamentally different. There are three main differences between the two. So the first difference is that the Einherjar are universally respected within Ysgard. And I mean, like, they are effectively considered heroes by the sheer virtue of just having been selected by the Valkyries individually. And of course, this respect grants them entrance into the great halls of Valhalla or Sesrumnir, which is, that's where everyone wants to be. Now, the second difference is power. Petitioners are generally just normal spirits who do have a reasonable level of power, presumably something similar to the level of might and skill that they had in life, whereas the Einherjar are considered to be the pinnacle of their species. Like, on one side, the Valkyries would only, of course, as you can imagine, pick the best of the best, but on the other, these spirits also are seemingly granted even more power by the sheer virtue of just being selected. And then the third difference, and by far the most important one, is their role within Ysgard. So, petitioners are theoretically just meant to populate Ysgard. Like, they are literally just spirits seeking to either unite with their god at some point or with the land itself, and until then, they exist within Ysgard doing what they do best, fighting and enjoying their heaven. Whereas Einherjar, on the other hand, have a very specific task for existing. Einherjar are meant to be the warriors of Ragnarok. When Ragnarok unfolds and the massive sons and daughters of Loki come assaulting the heavens, and the armies of giants and the supporters of Hel come from the underworld marching towards the city walls, the ones who would then meet them on as the armies of Ysgard would be the Einherjar. And so, these guys basically train and practice until the day of reckoning. That is literally all they do. Now, specifically the part that I'm not so certain of is whether the Einherjar are technically dead or not. So they are described as being like wispy in form. So basically, like, when you see them, they kind of look like spirits, but the lore also describes them as being given second lives, or having third and even fourth lives. See, an Einherjar can actually die, but if it dies in a heroic fashion, then a Valkyrie can just bring them back to life again and again and again, as long as they keep dying like badasses. Now, the lore does make a distinction between them and the petitioners in this regard. So, as far as petitioners go, we're told this, quote, "These guardian petitioners are a rowdy lot of warriors, reborn each morning, no matter how they were slain the night before," end quote. So it doesn't matter how petitioners are slain, they will be revived. However, for the Einherjar, we are told this, quote, "The Norse powers and Valkyries honor brave warriors, and those that are slain in valiant situations wake the next morning in Valhalla. There's two conditions though. First, a cutter's got to die heroically. He can't just be cut down in battle. He's got to hew his way through a horde of foes, defending his comrades and shouting battle cries with his last breath. He's got to take on the biggest, meanest, and most powerful creature on the battlefield and deliver a death blow while his life's blood pours onto the plain. Second, a chance at another life is a gift, but it's not a free one. Like a raise dead spell, a cutter still got to make successful resurrection survival checks, and she loses a point of constitution for the privilege," end quote. So as you can see, the lore makes it sound as if Valkyries resurrect creatures and bring them back to life, rather than simply bringing them back as another dead spirit. I mean, these guys are literally doing constitution checks to resurrect. But at the same time, they are basically described as looking like spirits, and technically are also even categorized as such. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if they're alive or dead. So I'm not really so sure what to make of it. I'll let you guys be the judge of this. Make with that what you will. Now, in any case, to give you an idea of the power of these fellas, each Einherjar is described as being a challenge rating 20 monster, which is, well, I mean, it's insane. So to give you some context, they are as powerful as Peat Fiends, as Balors, as Solars, as Liches. I mean, each of these Einherjar is effectively strong enough to be the last boss of a traditional Dungeons & Dragons adventure. And there are meant to be presumably at least 1 million of them which will fight in Ragnarok. So let me read you this quote. Quote, "Valhalla is immense and has lodging and dining space for several 100,000 warriors at once. The roof is made of shields, and the rafters and walls are built from spears. The hall has 540 doors for the Einherjar to pass through when entering or leaving," end quote. So the hall itself can house several 100,000, but of course, remember that not all of them live or sleep in here. These heroic warriors are spread out all around not just Asgard, but also all across Ysgard. And also remember that half of the heroic dead go to Valhalla, while the other half go to Vanaheim. So whatever number you think exists within Ysgard, you should double that. And that would be a more close account of how many of these heroic spirits exist. And again, each of them is a challenge rating 20 monster. Now, I should also point out, though, before you call them overpowered, that also each individual Ysgardian frost and fire giant is also described as basically being a quasi-deity. Yes, like each of them. So yeah, just like you imagined, Ragnarok is really meant to be truly a battle of the gods. But anyways, let's talk a bit about the Ysgardian realm, at least a bit. We don't really have time to go super deep. So the first town in Ysgard you're likely to see is Himmelberg, which is the only Aesir city that exists outside of Asgard proper. But it is established as a pseudo-realm for Heimdall. This would be where he's supposed to rule and live, though of course his job does take him away from the city, as he is basically tasked with manning, activating, and guarding Bifrost, so he spends most of his time there. The open space that sits between Himmelberg and the walls of Asgard is known as the Plain of Vigrid, and it is fated for this to be the battlefield of Ragnarok, specifically that, quote, final battle between gods, men, monsters, and giants will be fought at Vigrid, end quote. Now, Asgard, as you can see, sits inside of the enormous Asgardian wall, but the interesting thing about this realm is that they do not do towns or cities. Keep in mind that this is really just the barbarian heaven for all intents and purposes, so people don't really go around and live like normal, well-behaved citizens. Instead, what you have here are enormous halls or estates that exist separated from each other all across the unimaginably vast realm of Asgard. Now, the most beautiful out of all of them would be, of course, Baldur's estate, but the most important ones are Odin's halls, of which he has 3. The first one is Gladsheim, which is supposed to be the common hall of the gods. Now, this would be where all of the gods gather for Norse pantheon-specific celebrations or feasts, or when a new god joins the pantheon and swears fealty to Odin. Then there is Valaskjalf, which is where Odin's throne lies. The throne is called my god, and is meant to have the magical power of being able to see the entirety of Ysgard and even parts of Niflheim. Maybe even the entirety of Yggdrasil. Now, Odin only allows either his wife Frigga or a chosen one to sit on the throne, but generally speaking, Odin does prefer it for someone to always be sitting on it, so when he is gone, which is most of the time, he has a very specific champion selected for the honor of protecting the hall and sitting on the throne on his behalf. And then the last hall of Odin is of course Valhalla, the hall of the slain where the spirits of the greatest heroes dwell. Now, outside of Asgard, the great river Iving separates what is essentially the Asgardian lands with Jotunheim. Jotunheim translates into giant land, and as you can probably imagine, this is where the giants of Ysgard live, or at least most of them. The land is described as being a land of frost and fire, which basically means it is a mountainous tundra with a lot of volcanic activity. The biggest city in here is Utgard, which is shared by both frost and fire giants, and it is considered to be the capital of giant kind in the realm. Quote, Utgard is heavily defended and protected by illusions and camouflage. The city is ruled by a giant king, Utgard Loki, who keeps a council of jarls in line through sheer force of will. Succession among the giants is a bloody but usually mercifully short affair, involving the slaughter of all pretenders to the throne until only one remains. On the few occasions where there are no survivors, an ambitious commoner giant founds a new dynasty, usually a shaman or respected war leader, end quote. So, a few things here. So, the giant king, who is Utgard Loki, has of course a very interesting name. So, in Giantish, the word Utgard means outlands, or, like frontier. So basically, this king calls himself the Loki of the Outlands because, of course, he is one of the most powerful spellcasters in the region, and Loki himself is very well known on Ysgard as an illusory, powerful spellcaster. See, the giants of Ysgard are way more intelligent than the giants that you're accustomed to. And many of them, in fact, practice magic. Very powerful magic. In fact, the lore is very clear that this giant king has fought the Aesir gods and won using this magic. This is also why the barbarians of Asgard don't really like magic that much, because generally speaking it would be associated with either trickery in the case of Loki or with giants who practice it a lot. In any case, of course, this would be where the giant gods Thrym and Surtur live. On the realm of Ysgard you also have Vanaheim, which is the realm of the Vanir Norse gods. Because the Vanir gods are less inclined to violence, things are a bit more peaceful here. Quote, petitioners in Vanaheim are reborn each day just as they are in Asgard, but the realm's many feasts and pleasures mellow them. Few seek glory in wild melees. Instead, they fight in set duels, as if a fight to the death were a hand of cards. Each fighter tries to gain the greatest following for himself. Reputation is everything, and there is no greater insult than to refuse a duel in Vanaheim. All petitioners scorn anyone who has turned down an honest challenge. The duelists are usually single opponents, but doubles and teams are popular in some halls. Archery duels, magical contests, and horseback duels are also known in Vanaheim, and all attract huge amounts of wagering and speculation. Favorites change daily, and those not native to Vanaheim can rarely keep track of the status of the few thousand well-known blades." End quote. Now, we also have the Gates of the Moon realm in Ysgard, which is of course the realm of Selûne, goddess of the moon. We have already talked about her realm on our video on Ragnarok, so we don't really have to dwell too deep into it, just would like to at least re-mention that this is where the Infinite Staircase is physically found, which is a gateway that allows one to traverse space and time into any location it desires at any point in history, including the future. It is also the place where you can find that which you seek most in your heart, which is very important. And also, for those of you who played the Pathfinder video games, this would actually be the home plane of the Leylands, which I'm sure you have probably seen in the game. We haven't really seen them in 5th edition, unfortunately, but they are basically half serpent, half women. They are powerful celestials, which in D&D are native to Ysgard, specifically guarding and living in and around the Infinite Staircase. Now, that's that for the Ysgard layer. Next we got Muspelheim, which is the upside-down earth moats where the walking land is effectively made of fire. There's, well, actually not much to say about this place, honestly. The lore states that the place has been abandoned to the giants, and of course, specifically to the fire giants. Adventurers and Asgardians have really no reason to go here at all, and the place is basically close to empty, save for a few groups of fire giants. Quote, other than cheap cremation, Muspelheim doesn't offer much. Its obsidian is first-rate, its fires are useful to a few mages and smiths, but most of Muspelheim is abandoned because it has few veins of workable metal, little arable ground, and almost no game. Despite all this, the giants somehow cling to life, forging weapons for Ragnarok, raiding their neighbors, and waiting for the onset of Filmbull Winter, and the day foretold for them to storm the walls of Asgard. They have settled it for a long wait, so they don't do much in a hurry. Even Ysgard's most bloodthirsty bashers are content to let them keep their chunk of burning rock, end quote. And so that leaves us with the last layer, Nidavellir. Now, you know why I love Norse mythology so much? It's because these guys, I feel like we're ahead of the fantasy curve. You know what? Nah, these guys invented fantasy, and I stand by that. Norse mythology has the world tree, it has giant dragon serpents, it has a god-killing Sif from Dark Souls, it has magical spells, runes of power. I mean, geez, the Kraken is Norse mythology, by the way. Did you guys know that? Did you know that dwarves making magical weapons is also a Norse mythology thing? And you know what else? Norse mythology basically invented Dark Elves. I want you to take a little step back and absorb that. They invented the concept of a Dark Elf. And even more specifically, they had High Elves and Dark Elves. Now, the Greeks may have had Titans, but nobody cares about the Titans. The Giants is where it is at. And that is, of course, Norse. And you know what else is Norse? The Trolls. And let's not even talk about the sort of stuff that is not even in D&D, like the Druggers from Skyrim, which are also Norse. The Nordic folk were ahead of the game, man. Let me just tell you that. Anyways, the reason I brought that up is because I know that some of you might be confused as to why are there dwarves and why are there dark elves in Ysgard? Well, that's why. And Nidavellir is where the dwarves and the dark elves live, in underground cities across the floating land masses. I should also point out that these are good dark elves. In fact, this would be indeed the home of our favorite goddess. All of yours and mine's favorite goddess, the collectively voted best goddess of Dungeons & Dragons, Elistrae, the goddess of beauty, song, dance, and freedom for the Dark Elves, and in fact, really the only good goddess of the Dark Elves. Quote, her music is said to be woven into every fiber of the realm. Svartalfheim is a realm of silvery light, dimmer than the glow of Alfheim, but enough to illuminate tunnels and caverns. But its glow is in the half of it. All the realm's caverns and tunnels make sounds sweeter, make echoes richer, so that even the clanking thuds of miners sound like the enticing song of a harpy. All visitors, even a croaking slad, can sing adequately while in the realm, end quote. Svartalheim is specifically the realm of the Dark Elves within the layer of Nidavellir, and it is described as, well, being fairly gaudy and full of glitter. Many caves are carved from clear quartz or studded with shining mica and pyrite. Beautiful to the eyes of the Dark Elves, but relatively worthless to a jeweler. It is actually said to never buy a jewel from a Dark Elf, for they are not interested in the substance, but instead just only on the display. All a Dark Elf wants is for a place to look good, not for it to have any value. It doesn't matter if something is cheap, as long as it looks great. Now, the dwarves live on the realm of Nidavellir, of course also named after the layer Nidavellir. These dwarves are similar to traditional dwarves, except that they practice heavy magic. These are, of course, less lawful dwarves and more chaotic, as you can imagine, and they focus a lot more on commerce and making money than your traditional dwarf, who is, as you know, more interested in practicality and only in self-sustaining. Now, if you were wondering, there is indeed a light elf realm within Ysgard, which is found on the first layer of Ysgard, and it is governed by Frey, sometimes accompanied by Freya. Though there really isn't much for me to talk about. This is basically a realm for elves who are more interested in some of the philosophies that rule Ysgard, which really does imply a bit more freedom than what they might otherwise have in Arvandor. Whether it is elves that want more freedom to fight, or perhaps creatures that are associated with elves like dryads, who may want to be able to charm humans to keep us love slaves, which is kind of dark, but look, it is what it is. Basically, these would be creatures that want to be able to fight more. So, you don't want to mess with these elves. Remember that this is the last plane before we basically completely give up on goodness, and then we fall into neutrality, so things can get pretty dark in here. Many non-elves actually disappear when they enter that realm, so yeah, be careful there. But yeah, these elves are described as glowing, as if they had a light spell casted on them at all times, and they very much dislike dwarves and gnomes, not letting them at all into their realms. Now, for those of you who missed it, we just released our new PDF on Monster Classes 2, and on this PDF, I have for you guys dragons, ogres, and lycanthropes. The time is nigh for you guys to start playing ogres. We need more fun ogres around campaigns. For those of you who don't know what this is, basically I have created a way for you to effectively play as monsters in your D&D games. These monster classes take on the form of your race and your class. So in the case of the ogre, for example, your race would be ogre and your class would be ogre. So each of these monsters have 20 full levels and full racial abilities described for you, including tons of lore that I have salvaged from the ancient tomes of Dungeons & Dragons to help you better play those monsters. I've also designed rollable tables to better create your character, you know, like those from the player's handbook, the tables that you find on their background. Yeah, but I basically created a ton of those for each of the monsters so that you can design monsters with specific backstories for your characters. And all of them, of course, extremely super lore friendly. I spent forever getting this together, so if you want to support the channel and helping me do what I do here, please go ahead and check those PDFs. The reception so far has been amazing, and I am so happy that you guys are loving them. Thank you so much for your support, guys. I truly mean it. You are all the best. The link is in the description. You can also just type in mrrex.shop. Either way will take you there. There's also this link down here right below the video. You can click any of these pictures here of the different PDFs and it'll take you to the store. Thank you guys very much. I love you guys. I would like to personally thank my Patreon supporters, 5e Magic Shop, Morgan Johnson, Rusty Rain, Doc Feeder, The Great Codini, Omega Scales, Terry Culp, Benjamin Busters, Falky951, Ordorix, Sabim Kurshab, Thomas Hunt, Soulless Rider, Lost Crusader, Stalia, Stephen, Treb909, Trevor Hess, The Living Guild Pack, Describe, The Wizard's Vault, Herbert Johnson, James the Perverted, Shoddycast, Jesse Feliciano, Lucas Cyrek, Naxtor Ashura, John Harley, John the Wicked, Shane and Sam Skinner, Sir Ignatius Thunderblade, Warren Smith, Baruch, Alyssa Kestrel, Kristen Coleman, Lactose the Intolerant, Flameback 200, Merton Games, Falcon Scientist, Houndsong Games, Richard Sawyer, and Mavrath Master of Secrets for supporting me on Patreon at the $25 level. If you would like to support me as well, then please head on over to patreon.com/MrRex to support. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching, thank you so much for being here. Please check out those PDFs, it means a lot to me, and I'll see you all next time.